Imagine you had only one night left to live, not because of war, not because of disease, but simply because it was too cold. You open your eyes in the middle of the night. The breath leaving your mouth instantly turns into a pale white mist. Your fingers are so stiff you can no longer clench them into a fist. The tips of your toes slowly lose all feeling. Every gust of wind cutting through your thin clothing feels like thousands of icy needles stabbing straight into your skin. You reach for a switch. There is no electricity. You look for a heater. It does not exist. You open your phone to call someone for help. There is no signal, no battery. In fact, there is no civilization at all. Out there, darkness stretches for dozens of kilometers. Not a single light. Not a single roof. Only the wind screaming through snow-covered forests, and the cold silently stealing away every last trace of warmth from your body. How long do you think you could hold on? One night? Or only a few hours before your body begins to shake violently? Your heartbeat slows, your consciousness fades, and the final sleep arrives in numbness. That is a fear most of us will never have to face. But for the ancestors of humankind, it was never an accident. It was life, day after day, winter after winter, for hundreds of thousands of years. Today, when we feel cold, most of us only need to raise the temperature on the heater by a few degrees to feel comfortable again. But the first humans on Earth faced a world where cold was not merely uncomfortable. It hunted them. It tested them every morning. And with just one wrong decision, an entirely family, even an entire community, could vanish from history without leaving a single trace behind. There were periods when much of the northern hemisphere was covered by enormous ice sheets kilometers thick. Temperatures were many degrees Celsius lower than they are today. Winds from glaciers swept across the plains with enough force to steal body heat within minutes. Across that white frozen world, herds of woolly mammoths moved slowly through snowstorms. Woolly rhinoceroses dug through the ice in search of grass. Cave bears slept inside dark rock crevices. Cave lions silently stalked their prey beneath the cover of snow. And humans had no claws, no thick layer of fat, no fur to protect them from the cold. They were not the fastest species, nor were they the strongest. If we looked at the body, there was almost no reason to believe that we would become the final survivors. And yet, the greatest miracle in the history of evolution lies precisely there. That fragile creature did not merely survive winter, they learned to turn winter into a teacher, to turn cold into the motivation for invention, to turn weakness into the strength of an entire community. And step by step, they conquered lands that nature seemingly never intended for humans at all. So where did the true secret lie? Did it all begin with a flame, an animal hide, or is the answer far deeper, hidden in the ability to cooperate, remember, plan, and pass knowledge across countless generations? If you had to choose a single invention that saved humanity from the most brutal winters in history, many people would probably think of clothing, shelter, or even agriculture. But all of those came later. Before everything else, there was fire. Imagine yourself standing on a snow-covered steppe from 50,000 years ago. The sun has just disappeared beyond the horizon. In less than an hour, the temperature begins to plummet. Freezing winds sweep across the open glasslands, carrying tiny shards of ice that slash against your skin like blades. Darkness is coming. And with the darkness become the predators. In that world, night did not simply mean the absence of light. Night meant danger. Humans could not see in the dark like many predators. Our hearing was weaker than a wolf's. Our sense of smell could not compare to that of bears or hyenas. Once the sun disappeared, almost every biological advantage we possessed vanished, except for one, a small fire flickering inside a circle of stones. Its light was modest, but its meaning was immeasurable. Archaeology evidence suggests that our ancestors learned to control fire very early, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago. At first, they may have preserved flames from lightning strikes or wildfires, but eventually, humans did something extraordinary. They learned not to keep fire alive, but to create it. The first fire was not simply warmth, it became an invisible wall between humanity and the darkness. While animals kept their distance, humans gathered closer. The crackling sound of burning wood became the sound of safety. As long as the fire burned, the chance of surviving until dawn rose dramatically. But fire gave more than heat. It cooked meat, making food softer, safer, and easier to digest. It helped children and elders eat. It dried wet hides after snowy days, turning them from dangerous heat-stealing burdens into protection against the wind. It hardened wooden spears, straightened branches, heated resin to adhesive, and opened the door to tool-making possibilities nature had never handed to any other animal. Yet perhaps the greatest miracle of fire had nothing to do with flames. It had to do with the people gathered around them. When night forced the group to stop traveling, they no longer simply ate and slept. Around the fire, older hunters taught younger ones how to read footprints in the snow. Mothers shared knowledge of medicinal plants. Elders told stories about storms, animals, ancestors, and the lands of the group might return to when the ice melted. These evenings created the perfect conditions for language, memory, and culture to grow. Fire did not merely warm the body. It warmed knowledge itself. Wisdom no longer died with one individual. It could be told, remembered, corrected, and passed on. That was something no mammoth heard, no cave bear, and no cave lion could ever accomplish. But even fire had limits. A flame could warm the night. It could frighten predators. It could cook food and dry hides. But on an open plain, one violent gust could extinguish it in seconds. So humanity faced the next question. If fire was the heart of survival, where could that heart be protected? For many of our ancestors, caves were among nature's greatest gifts. Stone walls blocked the wind, held a more stable temperature, and offered a place where a fire could burn for days. It is no coincidence that so many ancient hearths, stone tools, and paintings have been found inside caves. But caves had one fatal weakness. Nature did not place them everywhere. Across many frozen grasslands where mammoths, bison, and reindeer roamed, rocky shelters were rare. If humans wanted to hunt, they had to leave the safety of stone walls behind. And so another revolutionary idea appeared. If nature would not give us a home, we could build one ourselves. Across the plains of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found the remains of shelters dating from roughly 15 to more than 20,000 years ago. Their most remarkable material was not stone or wood, it was mammoth bone. Massive black bones served as supports. Curved ribs formed frames. Tusks became arches. Over them, human likely stretched animals' hides, grasses, and insulating materials to keep out the freezing wind. At the center of each shelter burned a fire. Everything was built around warmth. The space was small enough to trap heat, sealed enough to block the wind, yet open enough to let smoke escape. This was not a random hiding place. It was engineering. For the first time, humans were no longer only searching for a favorable environment, they were creating one. To build such shelters, they had to understand wind direction, melting snow, safe camp locations, and which materials insulated best. They had to know which hides belonged outside, which should be closer to the body, and how to repair damage after storms. There was not instinct, it was accumulated experience. And these shelters were not built for one person. They were built for groups. Elders sat closest to the fire, children rested in protected corners, adults hunted, gathered firewood, repaired roofs, and guarded the camp. Everyone had a place, everyone mattered. One person alone could hardly drag a mammoth, tusk weighing dozens of kilograms, but a community could. And that reveals one of the deepest truths of human survival. It was not shelter alone that saved humanity, it was the ability to build shelter together. If we imagine prehistory as the story of a lone hunter standing bravely before a mammoth, we miss one of the greatest truths about human evolution. No one survived an ice age winter alone. Imagine bringing down a reindeer after days of tracking it across frozen plains. The hunt is only the beginning. The carcass must be butchered before it freezes solids. Dozens of kilograms of meat must be carried back to camp. Firewood must be gathered before nightfall. The shelter needs repaired after the latest blizzard. Predators are already following the scent of blood. And you became ill. A fever, an infected wound, a twisted ankle. Alone, your chances of survival collapse almost immediately. Nature offers no second chance. But humans discovered something no predator could match. Instead of forcing every individual to fight winter alone, they allowed the entire community to fight it together. Archaeological discoveries reveal prehistoric people who survived severe fractures, crippling injuries, and chronic illnesses for many years after they could no longer hunt effectively. Such survival would have been impossible without care from others. Someone shared food, someone kept the fire burning, someone protected them. Some choose cooperation over abandonment. Compassion, it seems, is far older than civilization itself. Winter also taught another lesson. No single person could master every skill. Young hunters brought strength and speed. Elders carried something even more valuable, memory. They remembered where reindeer returned each year, which rivers froze safely enough to cross, where fuel could still be found after heavy snow, and how to recognize an approaching storm long before the first snowfall appeared. That wisdom could not be learned in a single season. It required an entire lifetime. In a world without maps, books, or writing, every elder became a living library. Children were just as important. Although they depended on adults for food and protection, they also represent the future of the community. Every day they watched hunters shape piers, observed skilled hands sewing clothing, listened to stories around the fire, and absorbed knowledge that they had accumulated over countless generations. Humans did not simply pass on their gen, they passed on experience. Anthropologists call this cumulative culture, the extraordinary ability of each generation to build upon the discoveries of those who came before instead of beginning from nothing. That invisible inheritance became one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Yet even with fire, shelter, and cooperation, another problem remained. Our bodies were still poorly designed for extreme cold. Unlike polar bears or musk oxen, humans possessed almost no protective fur. During our evolution on the hot African savannas, losing thick body hair helped release heat efficiently while long-distance walking or persistent hunting. Combined with sweating, it transformed humans into remarkable endurance runners. But as our ancestors moved into colder climates, that same adaptation became a serious disadvantage. Evolution could not grow a new coat of fur fast enough. Humans had to create one. Clothing became another silent revolution. Simply draping an animal hide across the shoulders was not enough. Loose hide slipped during hunting, allowed freezing wind to enter, and became dangerously heavy when wet. What our ancestors needed was fit clothing. That innovation became possible through one of the smallest inventions in human history, the sewing needle. Bone and ivory needles discovered by archaeologists, many complete with carefully carved eyelets, allowed people to stitch hides into garments that closely followed the body. They produced fit hoods, insulated boots, gloves, and layered clothing that trapped warm air instead of allowing it to escape. The principle was surprisingly sophisticated. Several thin layers insulated better than one thick hide. Fur often faced inward to retain warmth, while the outer surface resisted wind and snow. Wet clothing was dried immediately beside the fire. Because moisture robbed the body of precious heat, they were no longer instincts. They were techniques learned through observation, practice, and teaching. Every stitch represented accumulated knowledge. Even tiny parasites tell part of this story. Genetic study of clothing lies suggests that humans began wearing garments regularly around 100,000 years ago, just as population were expanding into colder environments. Sometimes history survives not only in fossils, but in the smallest companions that evolved beside us. Still, clothing could not only preserve heat, it could not create it. The human body needed fuel, and winter demanded enormous amounts of it. Every breath of freezing air, every step through deep snow, every hour spent hunting against icy winds forced the body to burn additional energy simply to remain alive. Ironically, winter was also the season when food became the hardest to find. Plants disappeared, berries vanished, small animals hid or hibernated. Only large migrating herds remained. So humans followed them. Every hunt became a gamble against cold, exhaustion, and competition from wolves, cave lions, hyenas, and bears. Yet our ancestors understood something modern people rarely consider. Fat was often more valuable than meat. Rich in energy, animal fat and bone marrow helped sustain body heat through long winters. Mammoth carcasses, reindeer, and other large animals supplied not only muscle, but also the calories required for survival. Preservation became equally important. Cold itself sometimes acted as nature's freezer. Meat could be stored beneath snow or in permanently shaded places. It was also dried over fires or frozen by winter air. To extend this usefulness, communities were not simply feeding themselves. They were preparing for tomorrow. Unlike most predators, humans could hunt for future needs rather than immediate hunger. Every preserved meal represented planning. Every food catch represented hope. Eventually, our ancestors realized another profound truth. Sometimes the smartest way to survive winter was not to fight it, it was to move. Winter never stayed the same, neither did humanity. Many people imagine prehistoric communities settling in one place year after year. But for countless hunter-gatherers, survival meant movement. Imagine waking one morning to find that the vast grasslands around your camp has become an endless white wilderness. The reindeer herd was gone, its tracks disappearing toward the horizon. You have two choices, stay or follow. For our ancestors, that decision often determined whether the community would survive the winter. Rather than resisting nature, humans learned to move with it. They followed reindeer, bison, and wild horses because those animals knew where food could still be found. Over generations, these journeys became familiar migration routes. Rivers became landmarks, valleys became seasonal camps, mountain ranges became natural guides. But traveling across hundreds of kilometers of frozen wilderness required something extraordinary: memory. Without maps, compasses, or written records, humans created mental maps of the landscape. Every river, cliff, frozen lake, and forest become part of a vast network stored inside their mind. Just as important, they learned to read nature itself. The direction of the wind, the color of the sky, fresh footprints in the snow, the thickness of river ice, the calls of migrating birds. Each small clue revealed one information about what lay ahead. Rather than reacting only to the present, humans began anticipating the future. That ability transformed survival. Migration also connected different communities. When groups met along seasonal routes, they exchanged better stone for tools, shared hunting techniques, traded knowledge about distant lands, and occasionally formed new family ties. Each journey spread not only people, but ideas. Across thousands of years, these migrations carried humans through Europe, across Central Asia, over the Bering Land Bridge, and eventually into nearly every environment on Earth. Not because humans were physically stronger than nature, but because they knew when it was time to move. By now, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge: fire, shelter, cooperation, clothing, food, migration. At first glance, they appear to be separate inventions. In reality, they were all expressions of one extraordinary ability: human intelligence. Not intelligence measured only by problem solving, but by imagination. A bear prepares for winter because instinct tells it to. Birds migrate because biology guides them. Humans are different. We can prepare for winters that have not yet arrived. We can build a spear today for a hunt next week, sew clothing for a child who has not yet grown, store food for storms that have not yet appeared. Cognitive psychologists describe this as future-oriented thinking, the ability to imagine events that do not yet exist and act before they happen. That single ability changed everything. Fire became more than warmth. It became planning. Shelters became more than protection. They became engineering. Hunting became more than finding food. It became strategy. Perhaps the greatest example of this ability appeared during the quietest moments. Imagine an evening 30,000 years ago. Outside, snow buries the entrance to a shelter while icy winds howl across the frozen plains. Inside, a child sits beside an elder, The old hunter does not hand over a weapon. Instead, he tells a story. He explains where reindeer return at the end of winter, which wood still burns after rain, how to recognize dangerous ice before stepping onto a frozen river, which mistakes must never be repeated. The child listens carefully. Not for entertainment, for survival. Anthropologists believe storytelling became one of humanity's greatest evolutionary tools because knowledge no longer had to be earned through personal suffering. A lesson spoken in a few minutes could prevent a fatal mistake years later. That is the power of culture. Every generation inherited the experience of countless generations before it. Knowledge became like fire in itself. The more it was shared, the brighter it burned. Even during the harshest Ice Age winters, humans still found time to paint cave walls, create symbols, sing songs, and perform rituals. Those acts remind us that survival alone was never enough. Humans search for meaning as well. Perhaps those endless evenings around the fire-shaped language strengthened belief, deepened cooperations, and built traditions that continued long after the snow melted. Looking back, none of humanity's greatest achievements stood alone. Fire mattered because someone preserved it. Shelters existed because someone built them together. Clothing protected lives because someone taught others how to sew. Food carries communities through winter because it was shared. Migration succeeded because memory guided the way. Every success depended on one invisible force: collective intelligence, the ability to learn, to cooperate, to remember, and to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. That invisible fire burning inside the human mind proved even more powerful than the flames that warmed our ancestors through the longest winters on Earth. After everything we have explored together, perhaps it is time to ask a different question. What if winter had never existed? Would humanity still have discovered fire so quickly? Would we ever have needed to learn how to sew clothing, build shelters, or store food? Would communities have been forced to cooperate so closely? Or would we have remained simply another species of primate living in warm climates, never venturing far from the place we were born? No one can know the answer with certainty. But archaeology and evolutionary science both reveal one thing with remarkable clarity. The harshest environments often produce humanity's greatest leaps forward. Every winter was like an examination. It did not care how strong you were. It asked only one question: could you adapt? Community that failed to secure a reliable food supply disappeared. Groups that failed to preserve fire disappeared. People who failed to pass knowledge to the next generation gradually disappeared as well. Across thousands of generations, winter quietly became a force of selection, not only selecting bodies, but selecting behaviors. Communities that cooperated survived longer. Communities that planned ahead raised more children. Communities that passed on experience were far more likely to survive the harshest climates. In a sense, winter did not merely test survival, it tested what it meant to become human. This also helps explain one of the most fascinating paradoxes about our species. Humans are not the strongest animals. We are not the fastest. We do not possess the sharpest fangs, nor we do have the thickest fur. And yet we are only the species capable of living everywhere from scorching deserts to snow-covered subarctic landscapes. Not because our bodies are perfectly adapted to every environment, but because our minds can create new solutions for every environment we encounter. That is the difference between biological adaptation and cultural adaptation. An Arctic fox must wait thousands of generations to evolve a white winter coat. Humans do not. Within only a few winters, we can invent warmer clothing, a better insulated shelter, a more effective spear, a smarter way to preserve food. It is a form of evolution that unfolds far more rapidly, not within DNA, but within knowledge. Every small invention did more than help one individual survive. It became the property of the entire community, that it was passed to the next generation, improved, refined, and carried into the new lands. That is why anthropologists often say that humans are the species that builds upon the memories of its ancestors. None of us has to begin again from zero. Even today, that remains true. The winter coat you wear, the insulated home you live in, your heater, electricity, the food stored in your kitchen. Every one of them is the result of tens of thousands of years spent learning how to overcome the cold. You may never have thought about it, but every time you close a door to keep out the freezing wind, brew a cup of hot tea, or warm yourself in a warm blanket on a winter night, you are repeating actions that our ancestors began long before cities existed. Long before agriculture and even long before history was ever written down. The distance between us and them is not nearly as great as we often imagine. The only difference is that today, we have almost forgotten the lessons winter once taught humanity, and that brings us to the final reflection of our story. Because perhaps humanity's greatest victory was never defeating winter, it was transforming a ruthless enemy into the teacher that helped shape who we are today. Looking back across the entire journey we have taken together, perhaps the most astonishing realization is not that our ancestors survived winter, it is how they survived it. No single invention saved humanity, not fire alone, not shelters built from mammoth bones, not clothing fashioned from animals' hides, not hunting, not migration. Only when all of this came together, guided by intelligence, cooperation, and cumulative culture, was humanity able to overcome the harshest challenges nature had ever placed before it. Today, when winter arrives, most of us simply close the windows, turn on the heater, or put on a warm coat. We go to the grocery store to buy foods, we check the weather forecast on our phones, we drive along roads that have already been cleared of snow. Everything feels so ordinary that we rarely stop to ask why our lives have become so remarkably convenient. Yet behind every one of those conveniences lie hundreds of thousands of years of experimentation, failure, and learning by countless generations who lived before us. Every modern winter coat carries within it the very first idea behind an animal hide stitched together with a bone needle. Every warm home is the continuation of those primitive shelters first raised in the frozen wilderness. Every meal stored in the kitchen today reflects the planning skills of our ancestors, forged through countless brutal winters. Perhaps winter was never simply another season for our ancestors. It was nature's greatest test. But it was also that very test which forced humanity to become more creative, more cooperative, and more forward-thinking than any other animal on Earth. Without those freezing winters, human history might have unfolded in an entirely different way. And perhaps you, I, and the civilization we know today might never have existed in the form we now take for granted. Because in the end, what carried humanity through winter was never merely the warmth of fire. It was the warmth of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. It was the strength of cooperation. It was the extraordinary ability to keep adapting in the face of challenges that once seemed impossible to overcome. And perhaps that is the most beautiful definition of what it truly means to be human. A species that is neither the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the one most favored by nature. Yet, one that continually transforms adversity into innovation, hardship into creativity, and every brutal winter into another step forward along humanity's evolutionary journey, spanning hundreds of thousands of years. If you had been one of the very first humans forced to survive an ice-age winter, what do you think would have frightened you the most? A bit of bone-cutting cold, the endless blizzards, or waking every morning